At midnight, the political map of the world disappears. Not the mountains, not the oceans, not the cities, only the borders that tell us where one country ends and another begins. In their place are four colors. The Americas become one coalition, stretching from the Canadian Arctic to Cape Horn. Across the Atlantic, Europe, Russia, Africa, and the Middle East become another. India stands alone in amber. To its east, China, Japan, the Koreas, Southeast Asia, Australia, New Zealand, and the wider Pacific form a fourth block. Then the colors begin to move. This is the seductive version of World War. A clean map, a handful of arrows, and the promise that size can be converted into victory. It looks almost like a board game. Count the ships, add the factories, measure the land, choose a winner. But a modern civilization is not a game piece. It is a living network of ports, cables, transformers, refineries, farms, databases, railways, hospitals, satellites, and people who must keep every one of those systems moving while someone else is trying to stop them. The question is not which color conquers the map. It is how long each color can remain a functioning society. Before the first missile launches, this scenario requires an impossible assumption. Every coalition cooperates perfectly. No government defects, no province secedes, no old rivalry reopens. Generals share information, factories accept common priorities, rail networks move one another's cargo, citizens endure rationing without political collapse. Governments somehow agree on command, currency, production, and sacrifice. In real history, coalitions rarely behave this way. Alliances argue about risk, militaries protect their own supply, governments conceal information. Geography creates different interests even among friends. A block that looks enormous on a map can be divided by language, infrastructure, history, and fear. We are suspending all of that, not because it is plausible, but because it lets us isolate a harder question. If politics were magically solved, what would geography, industry, energy, food, and logistics still allow? The baseline is the world as it exists in the mid-2020s. Current populations, current infrastructure, current military forces, and current patterns of trade. Global trade between hostile blocs collapses. Neutral mediation cannot restore it. The war begins conventionally. Nuclear weapons remain present, but unused at first. This is not a forecast. Too much military data is classified, too many human choices are unknowable, and a conflict of this scale has no reliable precedent. It is a stress test of the systems beneath the map. To judge the outcome, we need to separate three ideas that maps often collapse into one. The first is denial. Can a coalition stop an enemy from using the sea, the sky, or a critical piece of infrastructure? The second is survival. Can it continue feeding its population, generating electricity, treating water, manufacturing equipment, and maintaining political order? The third is conquest. Can it cross hostile territory, defeat organized resistance, occupy major population centers, and sustain that occupation for years? These are not the same achievement. A navy can destroy shipping without creating a safe route for invasion. A country can lose access to imported fuel without losing every battle. A coalition can be impossible to conquer and still be unable to impose its will on anyone else. Modern military power is often measured by objects: aircraft, ships, missiles, armored vehicles. But objects are only the visible tip of a production system. Behind one aircraft is refined fuel, specialized alloys, electronics, trained maintenance crews, spare engines, software, runways, tankers, and an electrical grid stable enough to keep the factories alive. So our scorecard will not ask, who has the best weapon? It will ask three colder questions. Who can deny? Who can endure? And who can actually cross the distance required to conquer? The first hours would not look like the opening of an old war film. There would be no single front line and no clean moment when peace became war. The opening would arrive as a sequence of missing services. Navigation signals become unreliable. Military and civilian satellites are jammed, dazzled, spoofed, or attacked. Air traffic reroutes. Shipping insurers suspend coverage. Ports stop accepting arrivals because manifests cannot be verified. Banks delay settlement. Cloud regions isolate networks. Power operators disconnect equipment to prevent a cyber intrusion from spreading. Under the ocean, fiber optic cables carry more than 99% of international data flows. They are redundant, but not invulnerable. Cut enough routes, damage landing stations, or disable the systems that route traffic between them, and the internet does not vanish. It becomes slower, fragmented, and less trustworthy. The exact condition in which rumor moves faster than verification. Some attacks would be physical. Others would exploit software or human confusion. Many apparent attacks would be defensive shutdowns made by operators who could no longer distinguish a malfunction. The objective is not simply to destroy machines. It is to make every operator hesitate. When a port manager doubts the manifest, a grid controller doubts the sensor, and a pilot doubts the coordinates, the system begins to consume its own capacity in checks, delays, rerouting, and fear. The first target is confidence. Space is the first layer of the battlefield because so much of the ground depends on it. Satellites synchronize clocks. They relay communications across oceans. They watch weather, track fires, guide ships, map damage, and help weapons navigate. They also reveal movement. A train unloading, a runway filling, a tanker leaving port. But destroy the satellites is not a switch that turns modern war off. Large constellations are distributed. Some spacecraft can maneuver. Ground stations can shift traffic. Inertial navigation, terrain matching, radio beacons, fiber networks, and human procedures can replace pieces of a lost service. Every major coalition would have some ability to adapt. The cost is precision and tempo. An army that once knew where every vehicle was now receives intermittent reports. A ship that once planned an efficient route uses wider safety margins. Weather forecasting degrades at the same moment aviation and agriculture need it most. Civilian networks compete with military traffic for limited bandwidth, and attacks in orbit create a second danger. Debris does not recognize coalition colors. Fragments can threaten the spacecraft of the attacker, the defender, and countries outside the conflict for years. The war begins by trying to blind the enemy. Instead, it makes the entire planet see less clearly. The internet feels weightless because we encounter it through glass screens and invisible radio. Its long-distance backbone is neither. It lies on the ocean floor, more than 1 million kilometers of cable linking hundreds of systems and a relatively small number of coastal landing points. Most faults in peacetime come from fishing, anchors, weather, and accidents. Repair ships locate the break, lift cable from deep water, splice it, test it, and lower it again. In war, the same repair becomes a military operation. A cable ship is slow, specialized, and easy to track. Permits may no longer matter, but mines, submarines, missiles, and contested ports do. Crews need replacement cable, fuel, secure coordinates, and days or weeks in one area of ocean. Every repair advertises which route a coalition values. The network reroutes around damage, but rerouting has limits. Traffic concentrates. Latency rises. Some regions become dependent on a few remaining paths. Satellite lakes preserve critical communications, yet their capacity is small compared with fiber, and their ground terminals become targets of their own. The effect would be uneven. A capital may retain government communications while a hospital loses a cloud service. A bank may operate domestically but fail to settle across an ocean. A port may have cranes, workers, and ships, and still be unable to trust the data that tells it where the cargo belongs. Connectivity does not simply switch off. It fractures along the same fault lines as the war. A container port is a city designed for motion. Ships arrive within narrow windows. Pilots guide them through channels. Cranes lift boxes in sequences calculated before the vessel docks. Trucks and trains collect cargo according to appointments, customs records, hazard declarations, and destination codes. Remove the information and the port becomes an enormous parking lot. One container may hold medicine that must be refrigerated. Another may contain an industrial pump needed by a refinery. A third may be empty, but block access to both. Without trusted manifests, workers cannot safely improvise at scale. Then physical congestion begins. Ships wait offshore. Empty containers accumulate in the wrong country. Chassis and rail cars disappear into bottlenecks. Warehouses fill. Perishable cargo spoils. A single damaged bridge or channel can reduce capacity far beyond the footprint of the strike. UN trade data already shows how rerouting around one region can add weeks, cost, and volatility to ordinary commerce. In a global war, almost every major route becomes a risk calculation. Insurance ceases to be paperwork and becomes permission to sail. The first vessels to stop are commercial. The military then competes for the same tugs, berths, fuel tanks, cranes, repair yards, and trained crews. By dawn, the map may look unchanged, but the circulation beneath it is slowing. The Americas begin with the most forgiving defensive geography. To reach the hemisphere in force, an enemy must cross either the Atlantic or the Pacific. Not with one dramatic fleet, but with a continuous chain of transports carrying fuel, ammunition, food, spare parts, medical supplies, replacement vehicles, and the people required to unload all of it. An invasion force consumes resources before it fires a shot. Every aircraft needs a runway or tanker. Every ship needs escorts and maintenance. Every soldier who lands creates another daily demand across the ocean. Distance magnifies small failures. A late convoy becomes an empty depot. A damaged tanker grounds aircraft that were never attacked. A missing pump stops fuel from leaving a harbor. The farther the force moves from home, the more of its strength must be devoted to protecting the route behind it. The defending coalition fights near its own coast, beneath land-based aircraft, inside familiar weather, and close to repair facilities. It can disperse forces across thousands of bays, roads, railways, and airfields. This does not make North or South America invulnerable. Long-range missiles, submarines, cyber attacks, and attacks on ports can reach across oceans. Alaska, the Arctic, island chains, and narrow maritime approaches create exposed edges. But a raid is not an occupation. The oceans make destruction possible at distance. They make conquest brutally expensive. The hemisphere also contains one of the broadest agricultural systems on Earth. Grain from the plains, soybeans from Brazil and Argentina, fruit and vegetables from multiple climates, livestock, fisheries, freshwater, and some of the world's most productive farmland. At the level of calories, the coalition has the capacity to feed itself. But food does not move from a field to a family by magic. Modern farming depends on diesel, fertilizer, seed, replacement parts, electricity, refrigeration, finance, and transport. A combine is an industrial machine with electronics, bearings, tires, filters, and software. A dairy farm without reliable power loses cooling. A full grain silo cannot feed a city if trains lack locomotives or bridges. War would force a rapid simplification of diets and trade. Export crops might be redirected. Meat production, which consumes feed and refrigeration, could fall. Seasonal labor would be disrupted. Governments would ration fuel and prioritize rail capacity. Regions with surplus food could still experience local shortages because packaging, trucking, or payment systems failed. The Americas have agricultural depth, not immunity from hunger. Their advantage is that the raw biological base exists within the coalition. With coordination, substitution, and sacrifice, production can continue even after overseas trade collapses. Food would become less varied, less convenient, and more political. But it would not begin from empty soil. Energy gives the Americas a second layer of endurance. Oil and gas production spans the United States, Canada, Brazil, Mexico, Guyana, Argentina, and other producers. Hydroelectric systems run from Canada to Brazil and Paraguay. Nuclear plants, coal, wind, solar, and biofuels diversify the electrical base. In aggregate, the coalition is not dependent on another continent to possess energy. Yet aggregate numbers conceal geography. Crude oil must match refinery equipment. Gas fields need pipelines. Electricity cannot be shipped across an ocean, but it also cannot always cross a continent when transmission lines are congested or damaged. Some regions import the fuel grades or components their local systems require. Offshore platforms, compressor stations, export terminals, and refineries are concentrated targets. The coalition would have to rewire flows designed for commerce into flows designed for survival. Tankers once sailing to foreign customers would move between hemispheric ports. Rail networks would carry more fuel and less consumer freight. Industrial plants would be ranked by military and civilian necessity. This is the hidden advantage of diversity. Not endless supply, but options. When one route fails, another fuel, refinery, or power source may carry part of the load. That flexibility buys time for repair and conversion. In a long war, time is the most valuable resource the oceans provide. On the first day, the Americas would possess extraordinary military capability. The United States brings global surveillance, long-range aviation, submarines, carriers, logistics aircraft, precision weapons, and a large network of bases. Canada, Brazil, Mexico, and the rest of the hemisphere add forces, territory, industry, ports, and personnel. But the most sophisticated arsenal also casts the longest industrial shadow. Modern weapons require specialized semiconductors, machine tools, optical systems, rare materials, software, and manufacturing processes spread across countries that would now be enemies. Stockpiles can cover the opening phase. They cannot cover an indefinite replacement war. Factories would redesign components. Civilian production lines would be converted. Products built for efficiency would be rebuilt for repairability. Older systems might return because they use parts that can be made locally. Precision would compete with volume. The coalition's strongest industrial advantage is not that it already makes everything. It does not. It is the combination of capital, research institutions, energy, resources, and a large internal market capable of reorganizing around shortages. That reorganization would be slow, wasteful, and politically painful. It would also take place behind two oceans. The arsenal wins the opening battles. The shadow behind it determines whether there is still an arsenal in year 3. The same oceans that protect the Americas also imprison their power. The coalition could raid enemy coasts, attack shipping, strike infrastructure, and contest parts of the Atlantic and Pacific. It might establish temporary footholds or defend allied islands. None of this solves the central problem of conquest. Across the Atlantic lies a landmass running from Portugal to the Pacific coast of Russia, and from the Arctic to the Cape of Good Hope. It contains deserts, forests, mountains, megacities, and hundreds of millions of people. Across the Pacific lies the densest concentration of shipyards and manufacturing on Earth. To occupy even one major region, the Americas would have to secure ports, unload forces under attack, protect supply across an ocean, then move inland while repairing roads, rails, bridges, fuel systems, and local government. Every advance lengthens the line. Every destroyed junction creates a choice between stopping and rebuilding. Every city requires protection behind the front. The defender can trade space for time, The invader must control both. The Americas may be the coalition least likely to be conquered. That does not make them the coalition most able to conquer anyone else. A fortress can survive a siege. It cannot win merely by remaining behind its walls. Across the Atlantic stands the largest coalition by territory and the most geographically varied. Europe contributes advanced engineering, aerospace, pharmaceuticals, machine tools, and dense infrastructure. Russia contributes strategic depth, energy, minerals, missiles, and a defense industry shaped by large-scale land war. The Middle East contributes enormous oil and gas resources. Africa contributes population, farmland, critical minerals, energy, and geographic reach across 2 oceans and the Mediterranean. On a map, the combination looks overwhelming. It spans so many climates and resources that almost every essential input exists somewhere inside it. An invading force could win a battle and still face thousands of kilometers of rail, road, desert, forest, and resistance. Industry can disperse. Governments can move. The coalition can trade territory for time in a way no island or narrow peninsula can. Yet size is not the same as integration. The coalition inherits ports facing different seas, electrical grids with different standards, railways with different gauges, militaries with different equipment, and economies designed to trade outward rather than function as one machine. Its defensive strength comes from depth. Its vulnerability comes from every junction required to turn that depth into coordinated power. A resource is not a weapon. It is the beginning of a sentence. Ore must be mined, crushed, concentrated, transported, smelted, alloyed, machined, inspected, assembled, delivered, and maintained. Oil must be lifted, piped, refined, blended, stored, and moved to the machine that can use it. Grain must be harvested, dried, milled, packaged, and distributed. Every verb requires energy, equipment, workers, information, and another functioning link. This is where the Continental Coalition's abundance becomes complicated. A mineral deposit in Central Africa may be thousands of kilometers from a suitable refinery. Middle Eastern oil can power European aircraft only if pipelines, tankers, terminals, and refineries remain connected. Russian raw material may reach a factory through rail networks that were never designed for seamless wartime exchange with every partner. An enemy does not need to destroy the entire chain. It needs to identify the bridge, transformer, port, compressor station, or specialized plant that the rest of the chain cannot quickly replace. The coalition would respond by simplifying products, duplicating routes, stockpiling at junctions, and building crude substitutes. Over time, integration could improve. But the first years would be a race between adaptation and accumulated damage. Territory provides options. Logistics decides whether those options can become action. Europe is the coalition's most densely networked industrial core. Short distances, navigable rivers, high-capacity rail, sophisticated ports, skilled labor, and advanced manufacturing allow resources to move efficiently in peace. The same density supports rapid repair and substitution. A machine tool, a pharmaceutical plant, and an aerospace supplier may all sit within a day's transport. Density also creates exposure. Ports, rail junctions, refineries, and electrical interconnectors are concentrated. Cities sit close to industry. Airspace is crowded. An attack on one corridor can affect several countries because the network was built to share capacity. Europe's energy system has already been reshaped by the loss of much Russian pipeline gas, greater reliance on liquefied natural gas, and rapid growth in renewables. In this coalition, those former political divisions vanish, but the physical system does not instantly rearrange itself. A pipeline points where it points. An LNG terminal has a fixed capacity. A power line cannot carry more than it was built to carry. Europe can manufacture complex equipment. It can also repair infrastructure with unusual speed. Its problem is that an interdependent system offers an attacker many ways to make one local failure travel. The network is its strength. The network is also what must be defended. Russia contributes a different form of resilience. Distance. Industrial sites, energy fields, military bases, and population centers are spread across a continental scale. Some facilities can move farther from immediate attack. Railways can carry heavy material over enormous distances. The state has experience prioritizing military production and accepting inefficiency in exchange for strategic autonomy. But distance does not only burden the invader, it burdens the defender every day. A locomotive needs fuel and parts. Track, bridges, signaling, and switching yards require maintenance. A factory east of the Urals may be harder to strike, but every component and worker must still reach it. The route from raw material to finished equipment may cross thousands of kilometers before the equipment reaches a theater. The Arctic adds resources and alternate access, yet harsh weather, sparse infrastructure, ice, and long repair times limit capacity. Pacific ports create another outlet, but they are far from European industry. Strategic depth makes a quick knockout unlikely. It does not make movement cheap. Russia gives the coalition room to retreat, disperse, and continue. The price is a permanent tax paid in transport, time, and maintenance. Maps of great power war often turn Africa and the Middle East into background. Oil here, minerals there, arrows crossing empty space. That view is both inaccurate and strategically useless. These regions contain cities, industries, ports, universities, farms, power systems, and well over 1 billion people whose labor and political consent would shape the coalition's survival. They also contain some of its most important sea approaches: Gibraltar, Suez, Bab el-Mandeb, the Persian Gulf, the Red Sea, the Cape Route, and the Western Indian Ocean. The Middle East's energy resources are enormous, but export infrastructure is concentrated. Africa's mineral and agricultural potential is vast, but transport networks often run from interior extraction zones toward coastal export ports rather than between neighboring regions. Perfect political unity cannot erase those physical patterns. The coalition would need to build new rail links, expand refineries, protect long transmission lines, and redirect commercial infrastructure toward internal exchange. That construction would compete with military production for steel, cement, machines, fuel, and skilled labor. If successful, the coalition becomes far more self-contained over time. If it fails, abundance remains stranded, resources visible on a map but unavailable at the factory, hospital, or front that needs them. Between the Americas and the Continental Coalition lies the Atlantic. The Western Coalition is strongest near American and Canadian coasts, where land-based aircraft, sensors, submarines, and repair facilities support it. The Eastern Coalition is strongest beneath European and African air cover and near its own ports. Between them is not an empty blue field. It is weather, depth, distance, and uncertainty. Submarines would hunt shipping and one another. Long-range aircraft would search enormous areas. Satellites and seabed sensors would offer clues, then become targets. Convoys would disperse to avoid detection and regroup for protection. Every escort assigned to a cargo ship is unavailable somewhere else. Both coalitions could make the ocean lethal. Neither could make it reliably safe. That distinction matters. Sea control is rarely absolute. It is temporary, local, and tied to a purpose. A navy may open a corridor for hours without opening it for the months required to sustain an invasion. The most likely conventional result is a shifting zone of denial. Commercial movement collapses first. Military movement continues at great cost. Raids and strikes cross the ocean. Occupation forces do not. The Atlantic becomes a battlefield that both sides can enter and neither can own. India faces the harshest geometry in the scenario. To the north, the Himalayas restrict movement to difficult corridors. To the east and across the wider ocean, the opposing coalition contains China, Japan, Korea, Southeast Asia, Australia, New Zealand, and the great industrial arc of the Western Pacific. India is not small, weak, or undefended. It has a vast population, nuclear weapons, a large military, major cities, a growing industrial base, agriculture, a space program, and long coastlines with access to the Indian Ocean. Its problem is concentration of pressure. The opposing coalition can approach from multiple maritime directions, contest airspace near the northern frontier, and use manufacturing depth to replace ships, drones, electronics, and munitions. India must protect ports, refineries, airfields, power systems, and thousands of kilometers of coast, while maintaining forces in mountain terrain. The same central position that gives India influence over Indian Ocean routes also exposes it to blockade. In the Western theater, oceans separate two enormous coalitions. Here, the ocean curves around one. A blockade is not a luminous ring that instantly seals a country. It is a campaign to make every voyage uncertain. Tankers wait for escorts. Crews refuse contracts. Insurers withdraw. Ports close during alerts. Mines force ships into search channels. Submarines attack selectively, leaving every other captain to wonder whether the next contact is real. India imports much of the crude oil it consumes. It holds reserves and can ration demand. But a prolonged interruption would force brutal priorities. The military, agriculture, freight, hospitals, and electricity generation would compete with civilian transport and industry. Domestic refining capacity is valuable only while crude reaches the refinery, and the refinery remains connected to pipelines, power, and ports. Coal production and renewable electricity reduce some exposure, yet trains, mines, turbines, and grids still require maintenance and spare parts. The opposing coalition does not need to stop every ship. It needs to reduce the flow below the level at which India can simultaneously fight, feed, transport, and repair. India would respond with dispersed storage, overland routes, convoy systems, domestic substitution, and attacks on the coalition's own sea lanes. The blockade becomes a contest of leakage. How much can still enter? How much can be saved? And how much damage can India impose on the ring around it? Blockade can weaken a state without making it occupiable. The Himalayas are not an impenetrable wall. Roads, passes, valleys, and plateaus allow movement. Modern aircraft and missiles cross mountains that stopped older armies. What terrain changes is scale. At high altitude, engines lose performance. Weather closes routes. Soldiers require acclimatization, shelter, water, and specialized medicine. A narrow road can feed only so many vehicles, and every vehicle consumes fuel before it delivers anything. Landslides and damaged bridges can isolate units without a battle. An attacker may seize ground near a corridor. Moving the mass required to descend onto the plains and sustain it against a vast defending population is another problem entirely. An amphibious invasion is no easier. Beaches are not supply systems. The attacker must secure ports or build temporary ones, protect them from missiles and submarines, then move inland through dense cities and infrastructure the defender can sabotage. India could be strategically defeated, its trade broken, its industry constrained, its government forced toward negotiation, without an opposing army ever occupying the country. This is the pattern that repeats across the film. Defeat is easier than occupation. Occupation is easier to draw than to sustain. The opposing coalition begins with the world's greatest concentration of manufacturing. Chinese industrial scale, Japanese precision, Korean shipbuilding and electronics, Taiwanese semiconductor fabrication within the scenario's Eastern Bloc, Southeast Asian assembly networks, Australian minerals and energy, Pacific ports linked by some of the busiest shipping lanes on Earth. This coalition can build. It can also lose the inputs that make building possible. The Strait of Malacca is the shortest sea route between Middle Eastern energy suppliers and the industrial centers of East Asia. In the first half of 2025, roughly 23 million barrels of oil per day passed through it, about 29% of global maritime oil flows. In this scenario, the Middle East belongs to the opposing Continental coalition. The route is not merely contested, its source is hostile. Australia, Indonesia, and other regional producers provide energy and minerals. Coal, nuclear power, renewables, stockpiles, pipelines, and alternative routes all matter. But replacing the volume and convenience of existing oil and gas flows would take time. The coalition's factories are its greatest weapon and its greatest appetite. As tankers disappear, production priorities narrow. Civilian output stops first. Then maintenance is deferred. Then complex weapons compete with grid equipment, merchant ships, and farm machinery for the same steel, chips, and skilled workers. The factory lights do not all go dark. They go dark in an order chosen by war. India is surrounded, but it is not passive. Its position near the center of the Indian Ocean allows aircraft, submarines, missiles, and island facilities to threaten routes running from the Persian Gulf and Africa toward Malacca. Even if Middle Eastern supply is already denied by coalition politics, traffic from Africa, Europe, and alternate Atlantic routes must still cross broad ocean approaches. The Eastern Coalition can attempt to move energy from Australia and Indonesia, expand overland links, and protect regional shipping. India can force those ships to sail farther, disperse escorts, and spend time hunting a relatively small number of attackers across an enormous sea. This does not erase the imbalance in manufacturing or naval capacity. It changes the cost. Every ship assigned to blockade India is a ship not escorting fuel. Every aircraft searching the Bay of Bengal is unavailable over another route. Every port concentrated for efficiency becomes a target whose temporary closure ripples through the schedule. The Indian Ocean theater would not be a simple siege. It would be two interlocking sieges. The coalition constricting India, while India attacks the flows that keep the coalition's industrial core alive. One side has greater capacity. Both sides have access to the other's dependencies. At the start of the war, every coalition counts what it owns. Aircraft on ramps, ships in harbor, missiles in magazines, vehicles in storage, fuel in tanks, food in warehouses. Those inventories shape the first months, but they also create an illusion. The first generation of equipment was produced by a global economy that no longer exists. A missile may contain components from several future enemies. A ship may rely on foreign machine tools. A hospital may use a drug whose precursor was manufactured across the ocean. A power grid may depend on transformers, with lead times measured in years. Once the stockpile is spent, the relevant number is not what existed on day one. It is the replacement rate. How many aircraft can be repaired each month? How many engines leave the factory? How many trained pilots replace losses? How much propellant, explosive, copper, and precision tooling survives? How quickly can a design be simplified when its preferred component is gone? The answer changes over time. Early damage reduces capacity. Mobilization expands it. Learning accelerates production. Repeated strikes force dispersal and redundancy. Quality may fall while volume rises. War becomes an industrial feedback loop. The coalition that adapts fastest may outlast the coalition that began with more. Industrial power is limited by the part that cannot be substituted. A factory may have steel, workers, electricity, and floor space, yet stop for lack of one bearing. A refinery may hold crude, but lose a catalyst. A missile plant may complete every airframe while guidance components remain unavailable. A railway may own locomotives but run short of signaling equipment. This is why headline measures, territory, population, gross domestic product, total factories can mislead. Production is a network, not a pile. The attacker searches for nodes with unusually high consequence. The only plant making a chemical, the bridge serving 3 mines, the substation feeding a shipyard, the port handling oversized machinery. The defender searches for ways around them. Alternate recipes, smaller plants, repaired equipment, manual controls, and designs that accept lower performance. Complexity becomes a liability when it cannot be maintained. Simple systems become valuable not because they are superior, but because they can be produced, understood, and repaired under stress. The most advanced coalition may therefore simplify fastest. The most resource-rich coalition may discover that raw material is useless without conversion. The most isolated coalition may survive by standardizing around what it can still make. The machine does not fail where it is largest. It fails where it is narrowest. Population is often treated as another resource on the map. It is not. People are not interchangeable units of capacity. A machinist, nurse, grid operator, locomotive engineer, pilot, welder, farmer, and software technician each carry years of knowledge. Their work depends on sleep, safety, family, medicine, transport, and trust that the system around them will still function tomorrow. Mobilization takes workers out of factories and farms at the same moment production must rise. Displacement moves people away from the equipment they know. Blackouts reduce shifts. School closures and elder care pull others home. Illness spreads through crowded shelters. Exhaustion produces mistakes that no enemy had to cause. Larger populations provide deeper labor pools and military manpower. They also require more food, water, housing, and public order. A megacity can be a center of invention and manufacturing, while remaining acutely vulnerable to interrupted electricity and transport. The decisive coalitions would be those that protect specialized labor as carefully as they protect equipment. That means rotating crews, repairing housing, preserving hospitals, training replacements, and keeping families alive behind the production line. The human system is not the soft background of industrial war. It is the industrial system. Imagine the war 3 years after the opening strike. The most advanced weapons from day one are scarcer. Ports have been repaired, hit again, and repaired differently. Factories operate in dispersed buildings. Railways use temporary bridges. Civilians know the schedule of electricity and the meaning of every siren. Now ask what each coalition can still replace. The Americas retain defensive distance, food, energy, and a powerful base for adaptation, but struggle to project occupation forces across either ocean. The Continental Coalition retains territory, population, energy, and resources, but must continuously solve the integration problem across extraordinary distances and vulnerable junctions. The East Asian Pacific Coalition retains manufacturing scale, shipbuilding, technical skill, and regional resources, but must ration imported energy and protect maritime flows while sustaining pressure on India. India retains population, agriculture, strategic geography, and a large industrial base, but faces the most concentrated blockade and the narrowest margin for imported fuel and specialized components. No coalition is intact. None is helpless. Each has converted part of its civilian economy into a slower, harsher machine for endurance. The question is no longer who fired the best missile in the first week. It is who can still build a transformer, refine fuel, harvest grain, and deliver all three in the third year. War is a production system under attack. For civilians, the war would not feel like arrows moving across a map. It would feel like waiting. Waiting for the electricity window to charge a phone. Waiting for a bus that no longer follows a schedule. Waiting at a pharmacy for a medicine whose active ingredient is trapped across an ocean. Waiting for water pressure to return after treatment pumps lose power. Fuel rationing narrows every life. Refrigerated food becomes expensive. Ambulances receive priority while delivery trucks make fewer trips. Apartment towers without elevators become vertical traps for older residents. Digital payment failures turn a stocked shop into a place where no one can prove what they can buy. The experience is uneven. A rural region near food and energy may adapt better than a wealthy city built around continuous imports. A neighborhood with local clinics and community trust may endure a disruption that overwhelms a more efficient but brittle system. Governments would control prices, requisition inventory, censor information, and ask citizens to sacrifice. Black markets would appear wherever official distribution failed. Inequality would decide who could store, move, substitute, or escape. The war's most common sound would not be an explosion. It would be a machine that should be running, and is not. Hunger can exist beside a full silo. Agriculture depends on flow. Fertilizer to the field, fuel to the tractor, electricity to irrigation, parts to the machine, trucks to the warehouse, refrigeration to the city. Break enough of those flows and calories become stranded. The global food system is concentrated in ways that are efficient in peace and dangerous in crisis. A small number of exporters dominate major crops. Fertilizer production depends heavily on natural gas, phosphate, potash, sulfur, mining, and international shipping. Seed, chemicals, veterinary medicine, packaging, and machine components cross borders repeatedly. Every coalition in this scenario contains agricultural strength. Every coalition also contains dense urban populations that cannot feed themselves locally. Rationing would begin with luxury and waste, then reach animal feed, processed food, and dietary variety. Governments would redirect crops toward direct human consumption. Farmers would improvise around missing fertilizer and parts, accepting lower yields. Fisheries would compete with navies for fuel and safe water. The danger is not that the planet suddenly stops producing food. It is that production falls, while transport fragments and political fear turns surplus into hoarding. The silo is full. The road beside it is empty. A hospital can continue through a blackout. For a while. Generators start, emergency lights turn on. Critical equipment moves to protected circuits. Staff cancel routine procedures and conserve oxygen, medicine, blood products, sterile supplies, imaging time, and fuel. Then the backup system meets the rest of the world. Fuel trucks must still arrive, water must still be clean, waste must still leave. Laboratories need reagents. Pharmacies need cold storage. Dialysis requires electricity and treated water. Digital records, radiology, and communication systems need networks. Staff need transport and safe homes. War expands demand while shrinking capacity. Injuries rise, but so do ordinary illnesses made dangerous by delay. Vaccination and prenatal care are interrupted. Chronic conditions become emergencies. Mental health deteriorates under displacement, uncertainty, and grief. The coalition that protects medicine protects more than civilian morale. It preserves the workforce operating every other system. Hospitals reveal the false line between the military front and the home front. A transformer repaired near a city may save more lives than a weapon delivered somewhere else. Yet both compete for copper, transport, technicians, and protection. Survival is a sequence of priorities. Someone must decide which light stays on. Every theater contains nuclear weapons. At the start of 2025, 9 states possessed an estimated 12,241 nuclear warheads. Roughly 2,100 deployed warheads were kept at high operational alert, most belonging to the United States and Russia. In this scenario, several nuclear powers sit inside each major theater. Their command systems are under cyber attack. Satellites are failing. Communications are delayed. Conventional weapons can strike bases once reserved for strategic forces. That combination creates the most dangerous pressure in the film. A leader may not know whether an incoming attack is conventional or nuclear. A damaged sensor may report only fragments. A submarine commander may lose contact. A strike on communications may look like preparation for a larger strike. Weapons that are vulnerable on the ground create an incentive to use them before they can be destroyed. The decision time may be measured in minutes. Deterrence is designed to prevent this moment by making retaliation certain. Global war makes certainty harder to maintain. The same attacks intended to blind and paralyze conventional forces can make nuclear leaders feel blind, isolated, and cornered. Escalation does not require anyone to want the end of the world. It requires one person to believe the world may be ending already. Suppose one nuclear weapon is used. Not against a city, its leaders insist, but against a fleet, a remote base, or a military formation. A demonstration intended to shock the enemy into stopping. The detonation creates no stable rule for what comes next. The opponent must decide whether the strike was truly limited, whether more weapons are already in flight, and whether restraint will invite another attack. Allies question whether they are protected. Commanders disperse forces. Early warning systems raise alert levels. Conventional attacks on nuclear units become even more dangerous because every movement is now interpreted through fear of a second use. Communication may fail precisely when leaders attempt to signal limits. A phrase intended as a warning becomes a threat. A pause intended for negotiation becomes preparation. A missile launched at a military target flies along a path that another radar cannot confidently interpret. The language of escalation imagines a ladder, one step, then another, each chosen deliberately. In reality, the ladder is moving, damaged, and crowded with people who cannot see one another. The first use does not reveal a controlled path to victory. It destroys the assumption that the next decision can be controlled. Once strategic nuclear weapons are exchanged, the coalition map loses meaning. Ports, airfields, command centers, electrical grids, refineries, and cities are struck. Fire and infrastructure collapse, overwhelm medical response. Communications fragment. Governments lose the ability to measure what remains, let alone coordinate it. The destruction does not stay inside the target boundary. Smoke changes weather and light. Agricultural production falls. Radioactive material travels with air and water. Trade outside the combatants contracts in fear. Countries that never join the war lose food, fuel, medicine, markets, and climate stability. Some regions survive more intact than others. Some governments preserve command. Some communities organize and endure. That is not victory. It is variation in catastrophe. The military questions that occupied the first half of the film, sea control, industrial depth, blockade, occupation, become secondary to the biological and social problem of keeping human life going. No coalition can conquer a functioning world, because the functioning world is what the exchange destroys. There is no meaningful winner, only different distances from the center of loss. If nuclear weapons remain unused, the most defensible answer is not a clean victory. It is a devastated, unstable stalemate. The Americas are the hardest coalition to invade and among the best positioned to preserve food, energy, and a reorganized industrial base. They can deny oceans and survive behind them, but they cannot plausibly occupy the continental mass across the Atlantic or the industrial arc across the Pacific. Europe, Russia, Africa, and the Middle East possess unmatched territory, resources, population, and strategic depth. They are extraordinarily difficult to conquer, but their scale creates an immense integration problem and exposes critical transport junctions. The East Asian Pacific Coalition begins with the greatest manufacturing concentration and strong maritime power. It can place India under severe pressure, but it must protect energy and material flows while adapting an export-oriented production system to prolonged blockade and war. India faces the narrowest strategic position and the greatest risk of isolation. It may be weakened or compelled without being occupied. while its own position in the Indian Ocean allows it to impose costs far beyond its coastline. Each coalition can deny another's victory. None can cheaply create its own. Return to the map from the beginning. 4 colors, clean borders, simple shapes. Now add what the colors concealed. The cable landing station, the transformer, the rail bridge, the fertilizer plant, the refinery catalyst, the nurse arriving for a night shift, the mechanic rebuilding a pump, the family carrying water up 12 flights of stairs. Add the tanker route through a narrow strait and the repair ship holding position above a broken cable. Add the factory waiting for one missing component and the grain silo waiting for diesel. The map becomes less legible and more truthful. Power is not the area a coalition can color. It is the flow it can preserve under pressure. Resilience is not self-sufficiency in every object. It is the ability to substitute, repair, simplify, and choose what matters before the system chooses through failure. This is why modern war cannot be understood only through the weapons at the front. The front runs through every dependency that keeps a society continuous. The real map is not made of borders. It is made of relationships. This thought experiment began by granting every coalition an impossible gift: perfect unity. Even then, none receives a path to meaningful victory. Geography can protect a hemisphere, but it cannot make occupation easy. Resources can sustain a coalition, but only if people and infrastructure can transform them. Factories can replace weapons, but only while energy and materials continue to arrive. Blockade can break a society without making it governable. Nuclear weapons can prevent conquest by making conquest irrelevant. The fantasy of total war is that enough power will eventually simplify the world, that one side will remove uncertainty and impose an ending. The reality is the opposite. Every destroyed system creates more uncertainty. Every severed connection reduces control. Every escalation makes the final outcome harder for anyone to shape. The coalition that survives longest may be the one that best protects its flows, distributes sacrifice, and resists the urge to mistake destruction for progress. But survival is not the same as winning. And in a war large enough to divide the world, there is no victory large enough to justify what remains. Survival is not victory.